The flowers smelled like a funeral. Elara Voss stood at the top of the cathedral aisle in a gown that had taken 4 months and $32,000 to make, holding a bouquet of white roses, and staring at the empty space where her groom was supposed to be standing. 300 guests filled the pews on either side of her. Candles flickered. The organ played. Everyone was looking at her, and she was looking at nothing. Richard Caldwell was not there. Richard, heir to the Caldwell banking empire, the most eligible bachelor in all of Milan, the man who had proposed on a rooftop at sunset with a 3-carat diamond and a speech that had made her cry, which was something she almost never did, was simply not there. At 3:03, people in the congregation started receiving text messages. She could see it happening, row by row, like a slow wave of horror. Phones lighting up. Faces changing. Her maid of honor made a strangled sound and immediately tried to hide her screen. Elara kept walking. Her heels were loud on the marble. Every step without a groom at the end of it felt like a verdict being read aloud. Father Matteo met her halfway. He was 72 years old and had performed 400 weddings, and he looked, in that moment, like a man attending his own execution. He pressed a folded piece of paper into her gloved hand without a word. She already knew what it was. Richard's handwriting. Bold, careless, always in a hurry. I'm with someone else. I've been with someone else for 2 years. I can't go through with this. I'm sorry, Elara. You deserve better. Don't try to find me. 2 years. She had been engaged for 14 months. Which meant that for every dinner reservation, every dress fitting, every night she had fallen asleep thinking about the life they were building together, he had been lying. Deliberately. Every single day. To her face. She folded the note into a perfect square. She tucked it inside her bouquet. She turned to face 300 people who had gone completely, horrifyingly silent, and she smiled, not because she was fine, not because she wasn't shattering behind her ribs, but because she was Elara Voss, daughter of a diplomat, granddaughter of a general, and she had been trained since birth to show exactly nothing when the world fell apart. I apologize for the inconvenience, she said, in a voice that didn't shake once. Please help yourselves to the reception dinner. The catering has been paid for. Then she walked back down the aisle. Alone. In the white dress. While nobody in that church knew whether to clap, cry, or simply pretend they were somewhere else entirely. Outside, the November evening was cold and sharp, the kind of cold that cuts right through silk. The hired limousine was already gone, Richard's people had taken it. The photographer was quietly packing up his equipment. Elara stood on the cathedral steps with nowhere to go and absolutely no intention of letting anyone see that. That was when she noticed the car. A black Rolls-Royce, parked directly in front of the cathedral steps. Gleaming. Impossibly still. It didn't belong to any of the guests, she knew every car on that list. It was just there, like it had always been there, like it had been waiting specifically for this moment. The back window rolled down. The man inside was no one she recognized. Dark eyes. A jaw that looked like it had been cut from something that didn't apologize for existing. He wore a suit that cost more than the wedding reception, and he was watching her with an expression she couldn't name, not pity, not amusement, but something careful and direct that made the air around her feel different. You look cold, Miss Voss, he said. She had never seen him before in her life. But he already knew her name. She should have walked away. Any sensible woman in full possession of her faculties would have turned around, gone back inside, called a taxi, and had an appropriate breakdown in private. But 3 press vans were already screaming around the corner of the church with cameras raised. Someone had leaked the note, of course, because humiliation apparently comes in bulk when it comes at all, and Elara was out of good decisions for the evening. She picked up her dress. She got in. His name was Luca Moretti. He said it the same way he said everything, like it was a statement of fact and not an introduction, like names were something that simply existed and didn't require softening. He told her, without being asked, that he had come to the wedding to find Richard. That they had business. That Richard had run from that business the same way he had run from her, and that the two things, it turned out, were connected in ways she was not going to enjoy hearing. So she told him to tell her anyway. Richard Caldwell had borrowed an enormous amount of money from people who do not offer payment plans. When the debt came due and he couldn't pay it, he had offered them something else, Elara. Her family name. Her father's diplomatic access. Her connections. He had been planning to use her, the marriage, the merger of her family's influence with his, as collateral to buy himself more time. The wedding wasn't love. It was a transaction. And she had been the asset he was trading without her knowledge. The city passed outside the window. Elara sat very still and let that settle. 14 months. And she had been a chess piece the entire time. She didn't cry. She looked at the road ahead and thought about the version of herself who had written vows by hand at 2 in the morning 2 weeks ago, who had read them over and over trying to make sure they were perfect, who had been so careful, so deliberate, so completely and catastrophically wrong about everything, and she felt something cold and absolute settle over the grief. Not numbness. Clarity. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Wherever you want," he said. It was, she told him, the first honest thing anyone had said to her all day. He took her to a villa on Lake Como that sat at the water's edge like it owned the whole lake. Stone walls draped in dead ivy. Iron gates that opened before the car even slowed. Gardens that had been formal once and then, at some point, decided that rules were optional. Inside, high ceilings, oil paintings, bookshelves that went up to the second floor, and a housekeeper named Julia who was small and silver-haired and had clearly been surprised by absolutely nothing since approximately 1987. Julia looked Elara over from veil to hem, looked at Luca, and said simply, "Another one?" Luca said she needed food and dry clothes, probably in that order. Julia said the dress was beautiful, tragic but beautiful, and then led Elara upstairs without another word. That night, Luca cooked pasta in his own kitchen with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and it was, somehow, impossibly, the most disarming thing she had ever witnessed. She ate at his table. She drank his wine. She let herself breathe for the first time in hours. She didn't talk much and neither did he, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable, which was strange, because silence with a man she didn't know should have been the most uncomfortable thing in the world. The next morning, she peeled herself out of the wedding dress with the calm efficiency of someone dismantling something that had served its purpose, and she carried it to the window and dropped it into the garden below. It landed squarely on a rose bush. It looked like a crime scene. She felt, immediately and profoundly, better. On the third night, he came to find her in the library and made her a proposal. Not that kind, he clarified, before she could say anything, though she had already opened her mouth to point out her recent track record with those. A business arrangement. 6 months, legally married on paper, after which he would dissolve it and she would walk away with her safety and enough money to rebuild whatever life she wanted from scratch. His reasons, the men Richard had borrowed from now considered her an outstanding debt, and a Moretti wife was, in his world, untouchable. Her safety in exchange for 6 months of her time. No obligations beyond appearances. No strings attached to anything. She studied him across the library for a long moment and asked what he got out of it. His grandmother, he said, was dying. She had 6 months, maybe less. Her one wish was to see him settled before she went. She had always believed, he said, with a flatness that somehow made it more honest, that a man without someone to come home to was a man with no reason to be careful. He wanted to give her peace before the end. "You want to lie to your dying grandmother," Elara said. "I want to give her peace," he said. "Those are different things." "That's a kinder way of saying the same thing." "Yes," he agreed. And then he waited. She thought about Richard, who had lied to her face for 2 years and called it love. She thought about the man standing in front of her now, who had laid a lie out in plain daylight and called it exactly what it was. There was something almost refreshing about that. Almost enough. She named her conditions. Separate rooms. Full freedom to leave at any moment without question or consequence. The truth, always, about everything. He agreed to all of it without negotiating a single point. When she asked him why, he said she wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, she was asking to be treated like a person, and he could manage that. She said yes. She told herself it was practical. Logical. Survival. She almost believed it, right up until she caught herself wondering what he looked like when he genuinely laughed. The 6 months passed in pieces, and the pieces added up to something she hadn't planned for. His grandmother, Rosa, was 81 years old and 4'11", and she saw through people like X-rays through skin. She looked at Elara for 45 seconds the first time they met and said, without preamble, "You're not in love with him yet. But you will be." 2 hours later, Luca came to collect her and found them both at the kitchen table, Rosa cheating at cards with the openness of someone who had long since decided that rules were for people with less experience. Something moved in Luca's face when he saw them, something unlocked and warm that he hadn't been expecting himself, and Elara filed it away in a place she was keeping very carefully. She noticed things about him slowly, the way light comes through a curtain before the curtain is pulled. He knocked before entering any room she was in, every single time, as if her space mattered more than his authority within his own walls. He called his mother every Sunday and his voice went completely different, softer at the edges, almost uncertain, a son rather than a sovereign. He kept a photograph in the library that he never mentioned, a woman and a boy on a sun-bright beach, and he always angled it slightly away from himself when he sat at his desk, like the looking was something private that he did alone. In month 4, Richard sent a lawyer. Smooth suit, expensive shoes, a folder, and an offer of settlement, and, astonishingly, reconciliation. Elara listened to approximately 30 seconds of it, stood up, told the lawyer to inform Richard that if he contacted her again through any channel she would make his financial situation considerably worse than it already was, and held the door open until he left. When Luca came home that evening and heard what had happened, he sat down across from her in the library and said simply, "Anything you need. Consider that permanent." And she looked at him across the firelight and understood, with a clarity that scared her a little, that she was not going to be able to walk out of this house in 2 months. Possibly not ever. On the first morning of the 6th month, she lay in the room that had stopped feeling like someone else's weeks ago and tried to picture leaving. She could picture the door. The car. The gate. The road back to a city where she would have to explain herself to people, rebuild something, start over from a woman who had been left at the altar. What she could not picture, no matter how long she lay there trying, was leaving him. And that told her everything she needed to know about the situation she was in. He was in the kitchen when she came downstairs. Coffee facing east, same as always. He turned when he heard her, and she could see immediately that he hadn't slept. The shadows under his eyes were too deep for one night. He started to say something about the car being available, about Julia having packed her things, and she stopped him with his name. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked. A long silence. The kind that already has its answer buried inside it. He said he had promised her that she could. She said that wasn't what she had asked. And something in the way she said it, steady, direct, asking for the truth the way she had always asked for the truth from him, broke something open in him that he had been holding shut for 6 months. He told her no. He told her he hadn't wanted her to leave since the 3rd morning, when he had watched her throw a $32,000 wedding dress into a rosebush and thought, "That is the most extraordinary woman I have ever seen." He told her that this house made sense with her in it in a way it hadn't made sense in years. That she was the first person he had been around in a long time who spoke to him like a person and not a problem to be managed. That he found reasons to walk past the library door when she was reading. That he could not imagine the rest of it, any of it, without her. He looked, she realized, like a man who had been holding a door closed for 6 months against something enormous on the other side, and his hands were finally giving out. She crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him and put her hand against the scar on his jaw, the thin, silver, deliberate scar that someone had put there on purpose, and felt him go absolutely still beneath her palm. She told him about the cathedral. The note. The cold steps. The car. She told him about the pasta and the library and the cards and the fire and every piece of a beginning she had never chosen and would never have planned. She told him his grandmother was right, the beginning doesn't matter. Only what you build after. And then she asked him to ask her properly. For the first time in 6 months, she got the real smile. Not the suggestion of one. Not the idea that a smile might exist in the same universe as him. The actual thing, crooked and warm and absolutely, completely ruinous, and he asked her, in full, if she would stay. Voluntarily. With full knowledge. With no agreements and no end dates and no strings except the ones they chose themselves. She said yes. Nana Rosa lived 14 months past her prognosis. She died on a Sunday morning, peacefully, with Elara's hand in one of hers and Luca's in the other. She had seen enough, she said. She was satisfied. The wedding dress stayed in the rose bush. Nobody moved it. Nobody suggested moving it. In spring, the roses grew right through the silk red blooms threading through $32,000 of someone else's future, wild and stubborn and entirely unbothered by the story that had brought them there. Because that is the thing about the worst day of your life. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, it is not an ending. Sometimes it is just a door. And sometimes, parked right outside that door, is everything that was always supposed to come next, waiting for you to be desperate enough to get in.